But yes, definitely more alcohol. Definitely recommended.
Sold.
Paul, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm excited for this one.
This is huge, and we've been quite excited. Jorge, was kind enough to try and make this happen, and Jason was obviously really gracious to come on, and he's the man of the hour, and so we're really excited. All right, Arti, should we get started?
Yeah, let's get started.
Okay, Steven, hit the music.
Live from San Francisco and here on Clubhouse, it's The Good Time Show, bringing you today in technology. And now your hosts, Arti and Sriram.
Woohoo! Hey folks, welcome to tonight's episode of The Good Time Show. This is Arti, Sriram. We have Steven Sinofsky. We have a couple of awesome guests tonight. I'm going to let Sriram introduce them, but generally we do this for about an hour, about 3 to 4 nights a week. And we cover everything from tech, culture, TV shows, movies, things like that. And it's just been a lot of fun for us. For folks who are joining us for the first time, welcome to the show. We get tons of feedback on Twitter. I'm RTR, Sriram is Sriram K, and we get a lot of DMs, so keep them coming. We love to hear from you, get any feedback, future recommendations for guests, all kinds of stuff. With that, Sriram, who are we talking to tonight?
Awesome, thank you. We have a really exciting show tonight because, typically we cover a wide array of topics on technology, and every once in a while we are very lucky to get someone who is really a leader in a space that Arti and I don't know a lot about, and I suspect a lot of our audience here is maybe vaguely familiar with or has heard of but doesn't know in detail, and we get to learn a ton. And tonight we are super fortunate. So first, I want to introduce both of our guests. First, we have Jorge Conde, who is one of my partners at Andreessen Horowitz. He works on bio and and life investing. Jorge is one of my favorite people. He's funny, charming, and was gracious enough to put this show together for us. So Jorge, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for the kind words. He's never said he's liked me before, so this is an emotional moment for me.
It should be. Well, you have to earn it, Jorge. And for main guest tonight, we are going to really get into what he does through the show. But we're really honored to have Jason Kelly, founder and CEO of Ginkgo Bioworks. Ginkgo Bioworks, and I'm going to keep this vague because we're going to get into it, is really a leader in the field of synthetic biology. They develop a wide range of biological engineering products, which we'll get into. And if you just Google him and Ginkgo, you'll find that they've been in the news quite a lot. They're very much at the center of attention right now, and we're going to get right into it. So, but Jason, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's fun. Let's go.
Awesome. Okay, so let's start off with the basics. What the F is synthetic biology?
All right. So the core idea is inside of every cell is digital code in the form of DNA, right? So if you look at any microbe or bird or fish or whatever, and you look inside one of those cells, there's literally A, T, C's, and G's in there, right? So it's not zeros and ones like a computer, but it is digital, and you can read it with DNA sequencing, like you might have heard of the Human Genome Project, that sort of thing. That's reading DNA. And then you can write it with DNA printing, DNA synthesis, which is literally you go on a computer, you type ATCGGG, you hit print, and then out of machines, in our labs at Ginkgo or other places comes a piece of DNA with the code you asked for. And so the idea is if you can read and write code and you have a machine that would run it, which is you can kind of think of a cell that way, hey, that's programming. And so what synthetic biology is programming cells like you program computers because they run on digital code in the form of DNA.
Wow.
I want to get Jorge to jump in here because we have a lot of our audience who works in the technology industry and who write code for a living. How far does that parallel go? For example, we write really sophisticated piece of software. Everything from operating systems to search engines to live streaming audio apps like the one we are on. How sophisticated is the ability to program biology?
Yeah, and I think just to jump in there, Jason, I think because I love the analogy, we can read and write, DNA now. Does the analogy break down though when we can read code, but we also understand what the code means? means, we don't really understand what all the A's, T's, and G's mean yet, right? We can read the letters, but we don't understand the rules of grammar yet
Yeah,
in that language. Is that
yeah,
fair?
yeah. I mean, the way I think about it, it's kind of like alien technology or something, right? Like if I was like, hey, all right, you built these computers, they're great, you understand them, humans designed all the pieces, so you're good at writing code. I get it. But this meteor just landed over here, and it's got a computer in it, and it runs, 100 million times faster than all our human built computers. It's got zeros and ones in there, digital code. Are you interested in reverse engineering it and fucking around? Right? Like that's biology, right? Like it is the product of 4 billion years of evolutionary effort. It's like incredible supercomputers, basically. It does all this amazing stuff. But you're correct. We didn't write the code. Evolution did, and so we're
You're
effectively doing
describing the
reverse engineering.
you're describing the plot of Independence Day,
I
right?
am exactly. Yes, you're
Okay.
exactly correct. All right. Yeah.
Yes. One of many movie references which we shall use tonight. Thank you, Jorge. This is why Jorge is one of my favorite people. He knows pop culture.
That's exactly what it's like, though. I mean, it's nuts. And for those of us in biology, it's like shocking that people don't notice it. You're like if you looked at like a seed as a technologist, right? Like think about this thing. You put it in the ground, you add air, water, and sunlight, and this thing self-assembles itself with no manufacturing facility. It produces solar panels, and then it just starts, basically doing atomic scale manufacturing all on its own. Like, what the hell is that? Right? Like, it's a freakish level of technological sophistication, right? And people are like, oh yeah, no, it's a houseplant, right? And it's because we're sort of acclimated to biology, Yeah, it's
Well, you
wild.
used to have, at the risk of embarrassing you, Jason, you used to have this great slide very early on in your company presentation deck. This is probably a lifetime ago, where
Yeah,
you'd have a desk, and on the desk, I'm going to get the details wrong. You had a laptop and an iPhone and an iPad and a telephone and all these other things.
yeah.
And the question was, what is the most advanced piece of technology on this desk? And people would guess, and what people were missing was that there was a potted plant on the desk.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, everyone ignores biology. Yeah, big mistake.
And
Um,
we're not ignoring biology in 2021. I'll tell you that right now, given the pandemic.
Yeah, that's true, actually. Yes, with a
so
vengeance. Yeah.
E- so just to kind of make this real for the people listening in, I think, okay, we kind of grok the analogy of, okay, cells and biology are like computers and we can write code for them, but if we play this out, what does it lead to? So what can we, regular human beings expect to see due to the applications of synthetic biology? What is practical? What are objects that we're going to run into? What are we going to see around us? What can we expect?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll give you examples of stuff that's out there now, right? So have you ever had an Impossible Burger? Familiar with this?
Yep. Aarti, I think Aarti is a fan.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan. I like
You
it.
like it?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. All right. So like I'm a meat eater, right? And so, I bite into this veggie burger, right? And it's interesting because it bleeds when you bite into it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that it's a bit weird, right?
Which
Because
is a
there's not a
bit
lot of
disconcerting because, I don't eat meat. And then there's this thing that's all like, you just think it's like beet juice. But then I read about it and they said it's like heme. I'm like, okay, whatever. It's as long as it's vegetarian. And I just continued eating.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it is vegetarian. So like where are they getting it from, right? Because there's not a lot of blood in plants, right? And so what they did in Impossible was they took the gene for hemoglobin, right, which is the
Yeah.
protein that's in blood, makes blood red, right? But it also contributes to the taste and the smell of meat, right? And so what they did was they took that gene and then they took a yeast, kind of like a brewer's yeast, you would use to make beer, right? And they install some new code in there, right? So they add the gene for hemoglobin. They also include some other changes to the genome that tell it to turn that on and
Hmm.
kind of grow well in a tank. And then you brew it up. Instead of beer coming out, heme comes out. You add it to a burger, smells right, cooks right, tastes right. It's the Impossible Whopper at Burger King, right? So that is a disruptive product in the burger space. There hasn't really been a disruptive product probably in 100 years in the
Yeah.
burger industry, right? And
Yeah.
that's synthetic biology behind it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Arthi, a question for you, just to stretch this a little bit. So this is in the case where they got a plant to bleed by introducing the heme gene.
Yeah.
Um, would you consider it vegetarian if they took cells and basically cells and differentiated them into cow cells and made a burger patty out of that. But no cow ever lived or died
Yeah,
to give you that burger.
I read about, I've been reading about this and I don't know. I just don't know how, like, it's such an interesting question because Sriram and I, we grew up vegetarian. Like, our parents are religious, we're Hindus, we grew up vegetarian.
Yeah.
And so for us, it's like, it's not that we have any objection to, like, the meat eating part of it. It's just more like this is what we're used to. So I don't really know what I'm actually opposing or against. And so, yeah, I guess if
Yeah.
it's like no cows were harmed, I guess it's okay. Sriram, what do you think?
I don't think Hindu scriptures, were open to the idea of synthetic biology. This was not in the bylaws few thousand years ago.
Right,
Fair.
exactly. But that's such an interesting question because we've thought about this too. And we're like, I guess impossible is fine, but what does it mean when it's like completely manufactured in a lab and there was no real cow? Like, what does that mean? So, don't know.
Jason, when we think about the application of synthetic biology, our brain usually tends to sci-fi in the future. You think of superheroes, you think of, maybe growing houses or automobiles that can heal themselves. What are sort of, if you look to the future and maybe in a more sci-fi-esque way, what are applications do you think, like, actually we might be shocked by, but may actually be on the horizon?
Oh, that's an awesome question.
Okay, you want to fire it off, Jorge? All right, what I'm thinking on well, okay, so for the tech folks on the call, I will just highlight like kind of what that question is like. It's sort of like asking, IBM in 1945 to predict, what are all the applications of computers going to be, right? And I think if you think of a computer, right, it's a programmable machine. So you put in different code, it does different things. Like that's why it's so powerful, right? It's the flexibility of just being able to read different code and have it hit all these new markets. But at the end of the day, a computer just moves information around. So if you look at the things that the markets it disrupted, it's all the information-based industries, right? Media, finance, telecom, right? So on. Cells are programmable, but they don't move information. They move atoms. So what they're going to be disruptive to as we get better and better at programming them is basically every physical goods industry, right? So it's going to be food, it's going to be pharma, it's going to be building materials, it's going to be electronics, right? It's going to be anything that's made out of atoms at the end of the day is a biotech industry. It just doesn't realize it yet. So I get excited in particular about things that like leverage some of the superpowers of biology, like for example, like atomic scale manufacturing, right? So like I look at electronics, I think if you look at chips, 10, 15 years out, we're going to be growing parts of them. Like it's inevitable. So like, things like that, where you're really working at the atomic scale, I think biology's got nasty advantages there.
Wait.
So,
when you talk about growing chips, explain to us like how that can work, because I think that's the world where we can sort of we understand how chips work today in theory. What does growing chips mean? Like,
so I'll give you like a baby step. So a baby step would be like laying down, dopant on a chip, right? So you have to like really carefully position these atoms, right? And so we do all this lithography and all this stuff to try to put things in the right place. Well, you could imagine something, you don't need a whole, you don't need to be actually growing it on a plant yet. Okay. Like that's way out, but you could use the fact that you could have proteins form like a lattice structure or something and actually position dopants potentially more accurately than sort of the statistical approach we use today. Right. And so like, that's an example. That's like a, in the near term type application where like biology meets, say, semis manufacture, right? In the longer term, it's probably stuff at like, carbon nanotubes, things like that, where again, I think biology could show up and have some impact, right? But this isn't something that's happening tomorrow. You asked me to sort of speculate like that, but that's the kind of shit that biology's good at, right? Like putting atoms where they're supposed to be.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing is that biology is good at is storing information, right? And so, the next sort of, we move from like hard drives, right? The next thing we might be storing information on and retrieving information from is DNA.
Yeah,
and so
I just booted up my DNA-based Chia mine this morning. Yeah,
there you
storing new. Yeah, exactly. Why not?
Well, but Jason, there was that. Who did that work? Who did that work where they basically encoded the first? What was that first motion picture? The jockey,
like the horse running.
Yeah. So folks should look this up. This is wild. So someone encoded, and I wish I can attribute the
That was
work
the
to
lab up at Microsoft Research with the University of Washington, I think.
Is that
Yeah,
right?
that's
Okay,
probably
well, there
right.
you go. So they literally encoded a movie, and just to make it symmetrical, they encoded like the first film, no, that's been
All right, Jordan.
retained.
But here's my only pushback. Like, I think it's stuff like, all right, like, yeah, cool, I get it. Like, DNA is the ultimate information storage medium, right? Like, it uses no power, it's super dense, whatever, blah blah blah. But like fucking storing like our boring computer data, right? Like you what you want to use DNA for is to
What?
program biology, right? Like the
Oh, I
interesting
agree with
but
that.
the interesting thing that DNA does is it is the code for living organisms, right? Like us using it for fucking hard drives is so dumb. It's
Okay,
fine,
so
but it's not,
let's wait, hold on. Let's
like come
pull on
on.
this thread. Let's pull
I
on this
love
thread.
this.
So what is the best? So what can we program today? Like what is
Cells,
it that
yeah.
we can program that is badass? Because you don't like horse running movies. That's cool. So tell me what we're programming right now that is badass.
Right. So okay. So the reason I like horse running movies is because you're not like making the cell play a horse running movie or something. You're just literally saying like I'm gonna read out this ATCs and Gs and then put them into a computer and it's gonna show a horse running movie, right? So like it's just you're
Fair.
just talking about data storage. But in terms of like what you can program biology to do, I mean, what we can do today is limited by, as you were saying, like our understanding of how to program, right? So by and large, we kind of mess around with, well, let me say this, like a gene, right? Like you've heard of a gene, right? Like genes are they're kind of like the function calls of biology. Okay.
Wow.
So it's a particular piece of DNA code that like makes a protein, right? So you've probably been hearing about like the spike protein for
Hmm.
COVID-19, right? Like there's a gene in the fucking genome of that thing that encodes for that little machine that gives it that functionality, that sort of infectious functionality that the spike protein has. That's a function call. All right. And so there are, billions and billions of different function calls out in biology that were invented. And our ability today to write a genetic program is kind of like 5 to 10 genes. So you're kind of living in a world where you get to call 5 or 10 functions
Hmm.
before, shit hits the
Wow.
fan. Right. And that's nothing compared to all the many, many genes that are present in a genome. So there's sort of we're at the very, very beginning of this, right? So today it tends to be things like, like Impossible's doing, hey, make a protein that would usually be from an animal in a tank, right? That's also the early biotech drugs. Human insulin are made
Yep.
the exact same way, right?
Hmm.
So we're limited in that respect. Yeah.
Is there, so you've been, I mean, you guys are obviously at the cutting edge of this, and you've been working on this for a while. Um, is there going to be a version of Moore's law for any functions we can call at a given time? Like, will there be a Kelly's law that, we can do 5 today, but we'll be able to do X 5 years from now?
Yes, there's a few different technologies that you want to pay attention to if you want to like get why this is happening right now. So there's reading and writing DNA. Okay, so you can look at the cost, for example, to read a human genome, right? So the first human genome back in 2000, Human Genome Project, about $100 million for that genome.
Hmm.
You can buy machines today, it's like the size of a washing machine, that'll do a genome for about $100. Okay, so you're looking at a 1 million fold cost reduction over the last 20 years in reading DNA. And by the way, if it can read a human genome, it can read anything else, right? Like DNA is DNA. And so you've got this. So that's kicking the shit out of Moore's law, number one, right? In terms of like rate of
Absolutely.
improvement. And then the other one is DNA writing. So you have like companies like Twist Biosciences out in California, where that you basically, again, you send them an email with the ATCs and Gs you want, and you pay by the letter. Okay. So number one, just to note, like our code is physical. So when we compile code, like we pay by the bit, baby, right? Like, so it is not, it's not cheap right now to code. That's one of the big limitations. And so as the price falls on that, that's how you start to open up like more complicated programs, Jorge, right? And so DNA writing is the other one to watch. And that has also been getting cheaper, but not as fast as sequencing. And then the last technology, and Ginkgo's big in this, is what we call foundries. But basically, I did my PhD at MIT in bioengineering. You want to get one of those? It's like 5 years standing at a lab bench working by hand. Right?
Subtle
Like,
flex there, Jason. Good flex right there.
Yeah.
No big deal.
It is like I'm telling you, it is like brutal work, right? Like you are doing tedious lab protocols by hand in order to, for example, put the gene in a genome, grow the cell, test it, see what happened. we move all that onto robotics and automation, and so that's the other one, and that
Yep.
drops costs tremendously. And so those are the things, and
Mhm.
if you can bring down those costs, we get to write more complicated programs. And we do have a little, we call it Knight's Law after Tom Knight, my co-founder
Hmm.
at
Oh,
Ginkgo,
it's
and
Knight's Law.
we've been,
Excuse me.
yeah. So we've been tripling the output and having the cost annually on those automated facilities. So that has helped a
That's
lot.
pretty cool. And by the way, I would say for folks that are listening that maybe aren't as familiar with biology, so much of biology, as Jason just said, is literally moving tiny amounts of liquid around from one container to the other, right? And so the
Yeah, it's a
foundry, one of
craft
the
process.
yeah, exactly. So the foundry that you describe, and I want to get into this a little bit more, but the foundry that you describe is basically doing that at massive scale, at massive automation, because it allows you to do more, in a more replicable way. And that has an incredible amount of value when you're trying to do biology.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, probably in like 5 years of grad school, I got to design maybe 50,000, letters of DNA. And a big month at Ginkgo today is like 10 million plus, So,
Wow.
so there's just our
So that's not
ability to do
nothing.
this. It's gotten a lot better. Yeah, it's getting way fucking better. But I just want it, but it's like, it's mid-century computing, right? Like that's where we are.
Um, Jason, you mentioned, I think we spoke about Impossible Burger a little bit earlier. Today we are, we basically, have to go do some really bad things to a cow to get a burger. Well, most burgers anyway. I'm kind of curious to kind of deep dive into the impact of synthetic biology in just one industry. Let's just take food, for example.
Okay.
What is if this plays out, what does synthetic biology mean for the future of food?
Okay, yeah. So I'll give you an example I like in sort of how we make food, how we grow food, right? So you familiar with like synthetic fertilizers, right? So like
Yeah.
nitrogen fertilizers, right? So the way I was originally trained as a chemical engineer, right? And so the way we get nitrogen fertilizer is you pull nitrogen out of the atmosphere, right? The atmosphere is 70% nitrogen gas. You pull it through a giant chemical plant. You burn natural gas, like 5% globally, all right, to get hydrogen. You add it to the nitrogen. You make ammonia, right? You put it in a bag, right? And you ship it to farmers. And so they put it on the field. Half goes to the river, okay, half goes to the crop. You get a local environmental problem, you get a global greenhouse gas problem, about 4% global greenhouse gas, but we all get to eat, right? you know well, there are certain crops like soybeans that have microbes on their roots that run that same process. They pull nitrogen out of the air and they fertilize the crop, right? Like you remember like kind of crop rotation in grade school, like learning about like, oh,
Yep.
you plant, okay, well, that's what you would do. You would plant these crops that refertilize. Well, corn, wheat, and rice, it's, half of the $70 billion a year nitrogen fertilizer market. They don't have these microbes. So what could you do? Well, we have a joint venture, $100 million joint venture with Bayer Crop Science to take the microbes that live on corn, take the genetic program from the soybean microbes, and get it to work on the ones that live in corn. So that then you slap those microbes on there and you can wean them off that synthetic fertilizer. So if you could pull that off, that's a brand new, like that's a market today that has like zero biotech penetration, right? So you go and number one, it's a new $70 billion market. Number two, you start to knock into that 4% global greenhouse gas, right? Like that's the kind of shit biology can do. And like what other technology is going to grow in the dirt and produce fertilizer for free? Like what the hell is that, right? And like that's the kind of like those that gets me really excited is these like kind of like magical applications where you're actually deploying biology at scale, like in the environment in a way that it can like do something that we just have no other way to get at with our traditional technology. Like that's one I really like in the food space.
So while we're talking about the future of food, one of the tricky things with food is it goes into our bodies, and when we start talking about things like GMOs,
Oh yeah.
people start to get really nervous. And so, question one for you, Jason, is how do we destigmatize GMOs? And should we be destigmatize GMOs? And I think I know the answer to that last question from your perspective. And number two, if we can reprogram things beyond fertilizers, will that increase abundance? Will that increase variety? Like, where do you think this goes if we can essentially program biology to feed us.
Okay, yeah, well, so first I'd say like in terms of like as more and more people can program it, like also just think about like gardening, right? Like people are gonna want to make new varieties. They already do this, right? Like think about all these like people breeding roses and all that sort of stuff, right? Like this is the appetite to be able to do sort of magical things with biology. I think is going to be pretty extreme once you get it into if you can get it at a point where it's like at a price and accessibility that you get it in more people's hands, right? Now, you also asked about like GMOs, and obviously like the history with food has been a fucking disaster in genetic engineering, and so like why is that, right? And so there
So
was
actually,
like
could you help explain that?
go
Because
ahead.
I mean, like a lot of lay people, I've sort of been like vaguely aware on the periphery about the GMO debate. We
You
all
guys
kind
live
of
out
seen
in
the science and the
California. I
acronyms.
get
Could you
it.
maybe help
Yeah.
sum up? I know it's a complex topic,
Yeah.
spanning decades, but could you just sum up what has happened so far?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I can reduce the GMO debate to 2 minutes. Yeah, so like here's the thing with GMOs, right? So like that we had a big national debate like 4 or 5 years ago about like doing labeling, if you remember, right? And all the companies were fighting it and all this shit. And,
Mhm.
and I had an editorial, another flex in the New York Times, right? That was like, I run a GMO company.
Solid flex.
Thanks. I run a GMO company. I think we should label GMOs. Okay, that was the title, right? And the point was like all fucking scientists love to think that the issue is like we got to educate people better. Oh, if people just knew, like, hey, there's been 1 trillion meals eaten and no one's gotten sick and yada yada yada. It's not an education issue. It's a trust issue, right? Like, do I trust the organizations deploying powerful technology to be operating in my interests? Okay, and let me tell you how you destroy trust. You hide things from people.
Yeah.
Right? You're like, hey, I want to know what's in my food. Is this in my food? And you're like, I'm not going to tell you. What is your assumption at that point? Right? Like that sounds like that's probably a bad thing if you are hiding it and not letting me know that it's in there, right? And that was our position for years, right? When it came to these products, right? And if you look at Impossible, totally the opposite. You go to their website, you're talking about you go look and see exactly how that hemoglobin gets made. They're very clear about it. They just went through a whole process on this again in California on this, and like that rooting it in transparency is a big part of how you get people. And then the second is things that actually matter to the consumer, to the person, right? Like people don't really complain about GM. My dad's a type 1 diabetic. Like GM insulin is a fucking gift, right? Like human insulin, no one's complaining about that. Half of your drugs are made with genetic engineering. Well, people see a benefit, right? So that Impossible Burger tasting good, that has a consumer facing benefit. Like a corn that you can use a little bit of a different pesticide or something like that. The consumer doesn't see that. So those first generation of GM, I think it didn't speak to people in terms of like it wasn't better tasting, right? And they were hiding it, and so I think those problems are going to get solved this time
I think
around. You're seeing that with places.
that's a great explanation. I've always wondered what my personal issue is with the GMO because it's you're totally right. I think it's really an issue of trust. And it's almost always like, well, if you had nothing to hide, then why won't you just label it? Like, why won't you
Yeah,
just put it on the packaging? And I can choose, I can decide. I'm not stupid, and I can go read up and see if I want to eat this or not. And you're totally right that this is not. It's not this like education. Are you really eating a salmon? Like, it's not that. It's really about like this is. Do I trust you to make decisions on my behalf? Just put it on the packaging, kind of thing.
yeah, yeah. We have I Heart GMO stickers and I Heart GMO shirts at Ginkgo, right? Because our attitude is like we should be proud of it. And by
Yeah.
the way, the kind of people that care about what is in their food and how their products are made are exactly the kind of people that should get excited about bioengineering, synthetic biology,
Right.
because holy shit, it's way more renewable and superior to make things with biology than how we traditionally make them, right? So
Yeah.
like if you're the kind of person who cares about how your whatever fill in the blank, like whatever piece of synthetic plastic you see on the table in front of you right now is made, you should run towards when that says it's made with genetic engineering, because now you know it's renewable, right? And so like that's I think that's a great, our view is it's like, own it, right?
Yeah.
Be proud of it.
Yep.
So let me ask a tangential question to Arthi's question, if I could for a sec. We are depending on people to learn for themselves, right? Arthi, as you just said, like I can figure it out. Just label it and tell me what's in there. One of the things that I've noticed, given the field I'm in, and Jason, you probably see this every day, certainly given what you do, is I would say the level of scientific literacy is on average pretty low, right? I think most people
Mhm.
understand intuitively, they understand tech, right? They may
Right.
not know how the code base works, but they understand what, an app is and all of that. A lot of people, I think, don't know the basics of, biology. So when you start talking about GMO, when you start talking about synthetic biology, like it starts to feel like a pretty big leap. What are in your mind? I guess this is for all of you guys, but Jason, you spend time thinking about this. You guys are doing a lot in terms of communication. Where are we in scientific literacy, and what should we be doing better? Should we be sending our kids to not only coding camp, but to like genetic engineering camp, so they learn how to like program ACs, T's, and G's? Could that be that far away?
I mean, so here's what I'll say about that. You have kids, right, Jorge?
Yes, sometimes too
Okay.
many.
Yeah. So your kids, were they by any chance interested in biology when they were little? Things like, I don't know, dinosaurs or birds or frogs, or do they have like an obsession with animals and plants, would you say?
I would say that is accurate.
Yeah, I would say that's accurate for everybody almost. And then what we do is we spend the time and effort to teach kids that shit's not important.
Mhm.
And we go and tell them, oh, no, 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 come over here to all this human engineered crap that we've built over the last few hundred years. This is the important stuff, this junk. And what I'm excited about is as we improve the tools to design biology and bring it into more parts of our lives, all we have to do is just tell kids it's important. And they already think it's important. We just have to not lie to them anymore, not move them away from it. And so I actually think it's going to run like crazy, with kids. I think for sure.
That's great. I never actually thought about it that way because, we have a 2.5-year-old and she's just starting to get into all these things. We garden quite a bit, and, you're right. Like, you just have to, like, keep getting into just showing the things that they're already interested in, and kind of like connecting the dots for them. So that's great. So I guess, Jason, I wanted to ask you about YC. You were one of the
Yeah.
first, bio companies that went through YC. Why did you choose to go through them? My previous startup went through YC as well. You were like
Oh, cool.
batch after, a couple batches after. Why choose YC? How has it shaped Ginkgo? Like, give us some context there.
Yeah, well, number one, like everybody told us not to do YC at the time because we were like the first bio company to do it. And part of the theory was just like, hey, we're programming cells like you program computers. Like we might like get a better welcoming. Like we kind of spoke the same language, right?
Mhm.
And honestly, it's one of the best things we did. Right? Like Sam
Right.
Altman had just taken over as president of YC. Like Sam's been an unbelievable supporter for us, just awesome. And what YC does, is this is it teaches you how to be a great entrepreneur. Right, like that's what they're
Yeah.
really doing. Right, like the rest is kind of noise. It's all like you have to know more about your technology, of course, as the people as the founders of the company than anyone at YC would, and so
Mhm.
like I think it works great. The funny thing though is like ironically, there's almost like an anti like PhD bias, I think,
Mhm.
and this is like NYC. I'm not gonna single out YC. I think it's like Silicon Valley in general. It's kind of
Yes.
like it's like, oh, you did a PhD, like, oh, I thought you were ambitious.
Mhm.
Right? Like, why would you wasted 5 years of the prime of your life, like standing up, you loser, right? And it's like, hey guys, I don't know. Let me tell you, back in 2000, whatever, 2002, 2003, if you wanted to do synthetic biology, that,
Mhm.
like that was the only place to do it, right? Like all the technology, of course, was happening in scientific labs. Like it didn't exist yet. So like I don't know. There's like that's the only cultural weirdness when it comes to
Right.
these like more science-based stuff.
Mhm.
That like I anyway, it's a bit weird, but otherwise like amazing experience. Yeah.
And so speaking of like just cultural differences, I mean, you guys were very unique in a lot of ways, right? So,
Mhm.
um, first of all, you were one of the first bio companies in YC, as you said. By the way, do you get uncomfortable when you're outside of Boston for an extended period of time? Like, is that?
Jorge, do you tell people that you used to live in Boston, or are you
I
just,
do. I
are
do.
you, are you
Yeah.
like, no, I went straight from Miami to Silicon Valley. You know how it is.
I've got all my Boston gear. Yeah. But actually, now that the Miami stock is back up, right?
I know.
Like,
I didn't know Jorge was from Miami until Miami became a thing, and then he
Right,
mentions it all
exactly.
the
Yeah,
time, all the time.
I grew up in Florida also, so
Me too. Me too.
I find this. Oh, really? Yeah, I find this whole thing hilarious. It's like amazing
Yes.
to see this.
Yeah, Steven's the heart of Miami nightlife. Like, Steven has a whole other side to him. Just
Yeah,
look
Yeah,
at him, you can tell.
my shuffling great grandparents.
First of all, we have to clarify for the audience. Steven and I grew up in Miami. Jason grew up in quote unquote Florida, which is what you say when you don't grow up in Miami.
Oh my God! Wow.
But
There it is. There it is.
but
Yeah,
one of the
Jupiter.
cultural things that I think I think is really neat that you guys are very different is really two things. Number one, um, you know, in tech, it's very common to have sort of the technical founder be the CEO. In
Yeah.
biotech, that is extraordinarily rare, right? Where
Yeah.
the scientific founder is like, all right, I'm going to actually run this company. So one is I'd love to hear from you, sort of how was it obvious to you always from the beginning, like, yeah, I'm going to run this thing and this is my baby. And did you ever get any pressure to like, quote unquote, bring in a professional CEO? And the second thing that's unique from a cultural standpoint is, a lot of times in tech, you see, I think you guys are five co-founders,
Yeah,
six co-founders if you count Tom Knight.
five
That's
with
a
Tom.
lot of
Yep.
five with Tom, excuse me. So that's a lot of co-founders. And in tech, when that happens, like oftentimes a couple of those co-founders eventually sort of, disappear or fade
Yeah.
away or whatever.
There's usually a
I
lawsuit.
talked to
There's
Mark
usually.
Zuckerberg one time, and he mentioned that to me. He's like, "That's not a co-founder." Yeah.
Right, that's a lot
Yeah,
of
I was going to say there's usually a lawsuit. There's usually somebody writing an angry New York Times op-ed. There's a lot of things which happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes there's a movie. But
Yeah, exactly.
but in your case, all of you are still there. You're all at the company. Everyone's active. So I'd love to
Yeah.
just hear like how does this happen? So how is it that a technical founder, goes into YC, is still CEO, and the entire founding team is still, together and productive and building the company?
Yeah. So it is weird. A couple of reasons it happened. Number one, you know us, right? But for those that don't, right? Like the founding team met at MIT, doing synthetic biology when the field was just being born, basically. And I think I see Drew Endy's on this call, but
Yeah, you
Drew
should,
Endy
by the way,
was
you
my
should
PhD
clarify.
advisor. Always a dangerous game to have your PhD advisor on the
You should
chat.
clarify for the audience, Jason, that when you say MIT, just given the last conversation, we're not referring to the Miami Institute of Technology. This is
Wow.
the Massachusetts
Really
Institute of
pushing it,
Technology.
bumping it. Yeah, it's a matter of time. And so like the found like we started Ginkgo not really because we were like, oh, we really must start a company. It was like the next logical step for synthetic biology we felt was to try to industrialize it, take some of the stuff that like just wasn't going to work in academia.
And it was
right?
obvious to you that it had to work in a startup.
No, I mean it wasn't going to work in like programming robots and doing all the shit like the grind it out, sort of industrial engineering we needed to do like is not rewarded in academia. And so like, because I think if you'd asked us early on our PhDs, we're all planning to be professors. And by the end of it, it was like, well, this feels like it's worth a swing, and plus the academic world like forces you to do this like slave postdoc thing, which is like a total for show. And so we're like, all right, well, we can do this for a few years, and then if we have to, we can always go back to academia, and as long as things are going well, we'll do it, right? And so we did that. We bootstrapped it. We were completely not venture fundable. Okay, because like number one, we were starting it right out of school, which is like a thing in tech, not a thing in biotech. Number two, we had no product. We were like, oh, we're going to make this platform, blah, blah, blah. And then number three, it was 2008, right? It was like a just train wreck. And so we're like, all right, we'll just start collecting like used equipment and like bootstrap this thing. Tom put in like 100K, the professor that was working with us. And like, we just got a shitty lab and got to work. And we operated like that for like 4 years. We basically like applied for grants and did all this stuff to like keep the lights on. The company was maybe like, 15, 20 people during that time, like before we did YC. And like what was cool about those 4 or 5 years is it let the founding team like speciate, so
Good
like
word.
I was like the commercial guy, right? Like Rachel was like who's our president and COO, she was like management, right? Like Barry was our CTO, awesome in the strategy, like we like got to grind against each other for 4 years until we figured out like what we were all actually good at. And so then when we hit YC, that's when it kind of took off, and we all had sort of like roles at that point. And so like it's been an interesting, you know, so like that was it was really weird, right? Because we had like 5 years of running on like peanuts, and then 5 years of $1 billion of capital, and going big, right? So but that was a big part of the reason, was like we had time to diversify our efforts, and also because we were like in it for the bigger picture anyway.
One really fascinating thing about you guys, when I was doing a research for this show, is how many kind of companies you have spun out, and it's kind of a core part of how you guys operate. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Oh, I'll make one other just thing on that, before we leave the YC thing. Like, the other thing I think YC figured out, which was like genius, like back in the day, was like, let's tap these like fresh out of college, that first class that was like Reddit and Sam and everybody else, right? Like, let's just give these kids a chance. No one else is going to give them money, and so they were just like all these like ambitious people like waiting there who otherwise weren't getting the time of day from the venture community. That is exactly the situation with like PhD students, right?
Fascinating.
PhDs and postdocs, right? Like they're just waiting to, like you could be picking off, like Zuckerberg left and right out of that community, because you cannot get the time of day still. Right. And like Jorge said, in biotech, it's not the way, right? Like even now, like maybe Ginkgo will start to change the model a little bit because we've been successful, but like it is really not the model. So anyway, just a pitch for those on the call to find those people. Yeah. But yeah, on the spin outs, yeah, we have a model where, so we want to operate as Ginkgo's business model is to be like horizontal platforms. So like you come to us to get your cell programmed. So, if you wanted to have that, like, animal-free meat thing, or like the fertilizer, whatever, right? And what we have is like a giant compiler and debugger that lets you, program cells, and we do it cheaper than anyone. And we have a big like data and IP code base that we can use to make projects easier. And so like we make it available to anybody. And so what we've done is, in some cases we can find a customer. In other cases, we can fund a spin out, and that like becomes a customer. Right. And so like those are just different ways to kind of get new apps on the platform, basically. And so the most recent one, for example, is doing like wastewater cleanup. So it's like, using biology to like clean toxins in water and in soil and things like that. Because like, in addition to biology being good at making things, think about like biology is like the best recycler, right? It like breaks down fucking everything, right? And so like what we could use that half of biology for like cleanup purposes. And so that's this company Alonia, one of the newer spinouts.
And so you have, for folks that aren't familiar with the company, that's part of your business model, and the basis for that business model is the fact that you sort of operate on this concept of a foundry, right? Where you sort of like, if you go to your offices, it's actually really neat, right? You walk in, and the whole middle of the building, on the docks of Boston is all of these robots just moving things around, liquids around, and plates around, and all of that stuff. How do you decide what problems to work on, which ones are worthy, which ones are not? Like that seems like it's a pretty expansive set of options. So how do you prioritize?
We honestly, like, the goal is to have to, right? Like, it's sort of like asking like, Amazon, like Microsoft Windows. How did they prioritize what apps should be allowed to run on Windows, right? Like Amazon Web Services.
Sinofsky, Steven here decided. He just decided based on.
You win. That's why I brought it up.
It's a protracted court battle.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a good setup. Thank you, Jason. Nailed it.
Yeah.
I'll show myself
but
out.
Yeah. But that's the idea. Is like tech figured this out, right? And this was Tom Knight, my co-founder. He came out of the software world, and like that was one of his big realizations, was like, well, the low level tool, the operating systems, the programming languages, those are all common across markets effectively in software, because at the low level in a computer, all the code's the same, right? The apps are different, sure, right? Same thing in biology. Low level code's all DNA. The infrastructure in the cell that executes the DNA is all the same across all of life. So it's the same across all markets. So why wouldn't you have Windows, AWS? Like, why wouldn't you have common horizontal platforms to do all of it? And the answer is, of course you fucking should, right? And so like that's what we're building at Ginkgo. And our attitude is every app, right? So I don't want to pick, honestly, Jorge. We just want to do all of them.
Got it. Okay, so you'll take all comers as long as you have the
Yeah,
capacity, and
yeah,
you're
as long as
building the
they'll sign,
capacity.
and we'll build the capacity. Yeah, exactly. We've been tripling the capacity annually.
So speaking of apps, one of the new use cases that came up in 2021 was COVID.
Yeah,
So obviously that wasn't anticipated. Obviously, you had the benefit of the Foundry that you could essentially, adjust to what the need and the demand was, and that obviously became an important source of demand. And so, talk a little bit about what you and your partners have been doing for COVID, because I think it's important on both fronts, right? On both the
yeah.
reading side, and to the extent that testing is reading, and the writing side to the extent that vaccinations are writing. Can you
Yep.
talk through what you guys decided to do and what the impact has been?
Yeah, so March of last year, we decided, well, we have this sort of general purpose platform. We should make it available since this appears to be, at that time, like the biological event of our time. And, if this was a computer virus, it's not like Google would sit it out, right? And so the idea was, can we make our infrastructure useful? And so we offered $25 million of free platform work. We did a project with Moderna, for example, out of that money. And we also did some work in the antibody space and a few other things. And so one of the big categories was like mRNA vaccines, which at the time, if you remember, nobody even knew if they were going to work. Like the supply chain for those, it was kind of by definition immature, right? Because like these were a new class of drug, basically. And so nobody had ever made billions of doses of mRNA vaccines. And so we have spent a lot of time over the last year and a half, like attacking various problems within that supply chain where we can be helpful with partner companies. So either vaccine developers or vaccine manufacturers, right? So again, because we don't make vaccines, we don't discover nor manufacture them, but we do like optimize manufacturing processes. And so like that's where we've been able to plug in there. And then the other thing is like, for lack of a better word, it's like biosecurity, right? Like, think of it, this is it's kind of like computers in pre-2000 where we were like cybersecurity was kind of shit, and then you had these
Yes.
all those big attacks in the early 2000s, and we had to like build out more robust cybersecurity. Like that's COVID. It's like, hey, guess what, everybody? Like your biosecurity is shit, right? Like, and you might have thought we weren't actually able to like put the whole country on its ass with 30,000 letters of RNA, but the answer is you can. And so like we got to fix that. And so one of the answers is rapid vaccines. But even today, if like a new thing showed up tomorrow, we're probably 18 months away from countrywide vaccination. So like, what do you do in the interim,
Yeah.
right? And in the interim, to make life not miserable, you ought to be way better at like monitoring where the virus is so that you can do like targeted public health interventions instead of like big dramatic ones like we had to do. Right. And so where Ginkgo's been leaning in the most there is in testing for like workplace and school reopening, and schools especially. So like we're the largest like K-12 regular testing
To get schools open back
now.
up.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is remarkable.
Massachusetts, Maine, bunch of states now. Yep.
I'm glad you brought up biosecurity, right? Because this to me is one of the most important lessons from this entire last year and a half, which is biosecurity was something that was on the top of the national security agenda post 9/11, and it just fell off of that agenda over the course of the decade plus that elapsed after 9/11. And one of the arguments was, well, the threat was considered to be low eventually, right? Even though there were some early scares. And number two was, well, we just don't have the technology anyway to do this well. Arguably now the threat, you could argue this is a once in a century, pandemic. So maybe the threat isn't that much higher, but the threat is real. But on the second argument, like we actually do now have the technology to do this much more effectively. So do you think that post pandemic, we will have better biosurveillance in the US to be able to spin up testing capacity quickly?
Oh, 100%. I mean, honestly, like the one silver lining to this whole thing is this happened before our tools got so much better for cell programming, right? Like we're like muscling up right now and building out like, yes, like we're building out national scale surveillance testing infrastructure right now because of the school programs. We are building out rapid, mRNA vaccines, which are flexible. And so for a certain class of pathogen, like a respiratory virus, like this is we're building out pretty good infrastructure. Now, if the next one's like a bacterial thing, not so much, right? So like there's like a different set of infrastructure, but like, like at least we're like, so I do think we will be in a much better position. But I think we should not waste the next year or two, because this is, by the way, like the US can project power to the rest of the world, right? And I'm sure it's not lost on anybody on this call, like what's happening in India and other places, like this is our moment. Like we should deploy US biosecurity to these other countries, right? Like we do it with missile defense.
Yep.
Exactly. Right? Like it's of course, like this is what the fucking US does,
It
right?
should be a
Like
global
so, like,
shield.
of course, and of course we want to control it. Like this is like this is exactly the stuff we're good at, and like, but people aren't used to thinking of biology that way because it's been 100 years since something put the whole world on its ass like this, 1918.
Well, I'm sure since then you've gotten some phone calls from a 202 area code.
They're doing more and more.
Yep.
Yeah.
This on the COVID vaccine topic, I think you kind of touched on this a little bit. One of the things which I think really struck me is, the folks at Moderna, kind of had that vaccine, I believe, like a few short days, like last summer, probably last March or last April, and all the time between now and then was mostly taken up with testing and then logistics. So, is it one directionally accurate, and two, how do we fix that?
Right. So it's not totally accurate.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So yeah, they got the candidate done quickly, and then you still have to make all this stuff, right? So you don't like overnight have like the 600 million doses you need, right? So it took, and I think particularly with an mRNA vaccine, because it was a new one, like that manufacturing push started instantaneously because the U.S. government funded it, and so like we couldn't have gotten, I would say, the quantity of vaccines any faster than we got them. Okay, in terms of the manufacturing side of things. Now that there's the regulatory also went like really damn fast because we had like a raging outbreak, and so it was very easy to collect the data. Right? Like there's like plenty of cases to work for the placebo group, and like get statistically significant safety data. And so like that was fucking fast. Now I think what you could maybe get faster next time is the manufacturing. So if we like pre-baked a bunch of stuff, then I think you could get down to like, call it like maybe like a 3-month manufacturing window, where you went from like, okay, new thing, yes, absolutely. And by the way, NIH did a lot of the design too, but like, here's the design, and then great, manufacture enough doses, and importantly, if you can do that really fast, you could even start to do ring vaccination. You could have said like, great, vaccinate New York, Seattle, and whatever right at the beginning before it got to the whole country. Right. So like there's different strategies you can take if you can manufacture more quickly. But this was a new way to make vaccines, so we just had none of that shit.
So you're pretty optimistic about where we are coming out of this as a country.
I'm optimistic of where it's going, yes. And I would say also, like, I have general optimism about biosecurity also, weirdly, because I think like, unlike computers and other human engineered stuff where like where I kind of like discover, oh, it turns out like once Facebook reaches a certain size, it can like fuck up elections. Like there's like stuff you discover after, right? Like biology's been messing with us for a long time. So actually like pathogenicity is understood, right? Like, and we don't invent new stuff. Like bioengineers, like I said, those function calls, they come from nature. So like we kind of know all the function calls associated with pathogenicity. Like we should just like bury those things. Like we should just figure out like all the countermeasures to those and like be really robust about it. And then I feel like you'd have like a really solid, then you could enter a world of like, hey, people can design biology, with a good buffer of safety around it.
Right. And you're not worried about a bad guy doing a bad thing with biology in a garage. I mean, that's still pretty hard to do.
I'm less worried about a guy in a garage, but I do worry about states, and then over time, as the technology gets cheaper, like it can become guys in a garage, right? Like in the sense of, like, to me, biosecurity is going to be more like cyber, not like nuclear, right? In other words, like, because everyone's going to program this stuff, right? Like it's going to just be out there, and it should, by the way, right? Like biology is amazing. Like we want to have everybody programming it, it's like incredible. People are going to want to do it.
It's amazing.
So let me shift to a sunnier topic if I could for a second.
Yeah.
So when I look when I look at the the team that you have at Ginkgo, like everyone makes sense in terms of roles and titles for a, genetic engineering, synthetic biology, organism design company.
Yeah.
And then you have a creative director.
Oh, yes.
Christina.
Christina
What's that all about? Who is awesome, by the way. I'm a big fan of Christina.
Oh, she's a genius.
But why do you have a creative director? Is there art involved here?
Mm-hmm.
Or is art an application of synthetic biology? Maybe is a better way to ask the question.
Oh, an app like so Silicon Valley. Is art an app? No.
No. I said application.
I mean, one reason to have a creative director is like what we talked about earlier. Like I don't know if you know the history with like IBM when in the first half of the last century, okay, when they were inventing computers, like Tom Watson Sr. And they had a magazine called Think Magazine that they published widely to basically just explain to people what the hell a computer was, right? So we have a magazine, Grow Magazine, right? Like we actively figure out like how do you talk to people about this technology, because people need to build comfort with it, right? And so that's one reason, is so that we're actually able to talk to humans. But the other reason is like think of the most beautiful things you can think of. I bet most of them are biological, right? Like as we are able to write DNA, you are going to put it in the hands of artists and designers, and they are going to get to paint with biology, right? Like that is going to be awesome, And so of course we want to be at the, encouraging that. We have a artist in residence program and all kinds of stuff. Like it's going to be the substrate for art, in my opinion, in the future.
Wow. I never heard that before, and that is so fascinating and so optimistic. I love that. Okay, Jason, we have a couple of minutes left, and I need to end on this question because I think this has been on top of mind for all of us. Okay. When do we get Jurassic Park? When do we get a fly stuck in amber and that cute little DNA animation thing and Ian Malcolm and all of that?
So I think you will. Here's what I think you'll see. So I think you will see a mammoth in your lifetime.
Whoa! Wait, really?
You actually think that?
Wait, what?
Yeah,
just
for sure.
Say that casually.
You'll get a woolly mammoth. Yeah, because the problem with that, so the issue with dinosaurs is they're so old evolutionarily that like we don't have like the full genomes of dinosaurs. So like you can't but we have like
this is where in the movies they cross it with some really bad animal, and then Chris Pratt says, "Who thought this was a good idea?" And then all the scientists die.
Like people have seen this movie, right?
Yeah, it's the best genetic engineering movie in history. It's my favorite movie. It's why half the people at Ginkgo ended up as bioengineers. Yeah.
Did you not see what happened to the bioengineers in the movie?
So
yeah,
here is
it
what's
didn't
so
go well.
Yeah. Life will find a way is actually
Oh my
very
God.
important thing for genetic engineers to keep in mind, right? Because you brought this up earlier. Cells are programmable, but they are not computers, right? In other words, they are not predictable. And we ain't going to make them predictable. We're not going to turn biology into computers, right? Like we're going to turn computers more biological, right? It's going to go the other way. And you can't. It isn't something that's like a clock, right? And so actually that's a cool lesson. But that said, fucking birds are dinosaurs. So dinosaurs never died out. So we actually still have. So I think I think what somebody will eventually do is go backwards from a bird and play around with it enough until it at least looks like a dinosaur. I think you'll get that also.
Shriram's too polite to ask the question, so I'll ask it. How much are you going to charge to admission to Jurassic Park?
That will be free. Yeah, if we can do that, I think you give that to the world.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Wow. Okay. I did not expect that. I thought you were going to be like, well, that is science fiction. It's not going to happen, and not be like, well, we're going to get a woolly mammoth. That is going to blow some people's minds. And we thought people in the tech industry here made some wild predictions, but here you go. Okay. Well, on that note, on that very unexpected note, I think we should wrap. It's been amazing hour. I have to say we got so many notes and DMs from people whose minds were blown. We learned a lot. So first, I want to thank everybody in the audience for listening in. And I want to thank Steven. I want to thank Jorge for making this whole show happen and also being a fantastic co-host. So Jorge, you should come back on the show.
My pleasure. This was fun.
Yeah, you've been such a great co-host. But mostly I want to thank Jason. Jason, you are funny, you're irreverent, you swear a lot, and you might be making Jurassic Park come true. And I'm just blown away. We're all just blown away. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Jason. Amazing.
Well, we have a tradition on the show, which is we try and play a song which matches the content of the show and what we have spoken about. So there's only one song that we can play out to end the show tonight. So to John Williams and the theme from Jurassic Park, I want to say good night, everybody, and see you next week.